All right, so you're diving into Tkinter for your Python GUI.
And you want to know the secrets of organized, professional-looking layouts?
Yeah,
There.
let's talk label frames.
We've got code examples and insider tips to turn you into a LabelFrame pro.
And not just the basics.
We're going to uncover those it can do that features.
That can really make your interfaces shine.
Plus, we'll help you sidestep some common traps along the way.
Music to my ears.
So let's start simple.
What exactly is a label frame?
It sounds pretty self-explanatory.
But I have a feeling there's more to it.
You're right, it's not just a fancy name.
A label frame in Tkinter is a frame, yes.
But with a built-in label.
This little addition is huge for how you organize your GUI.
Both visually and in terms of how your code is structured.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So it's more than just aesthetics.
Exactly.
Think about a user looking at your GUI.
If you've got buttons and entry boxes scattered everywhere,
It's confusing.
but if you use label frames to group related elements together,
say all your account settings in one labeled frame.
and all the display options in another, it instantly makes things clearer and easier to use.
So it's like putting labels on drawers to organize your socks.
Good for you and anyone else who might need to find something.
Exactly. And the code to make this happen is surprisingly straightforward.
In fact, we've got a basic label frame example lined up that you can practically copy and paste directly into your project.
Now you're speaking my language.
Let's see this code in action.
All right, so we'll start by importing the Tkinter library.
Think of this as opening your GUI toolbox.
Then we'll create our main window and set its size using the geometry function.
Of course, you can adjust the size later to fit your application's needs.
Makes sense.
It's like setting the stage before the play begins.
So where do label frames come into the picture?
Right after we set the stage.
We create a label frame using Tkinter LabelFrame and give it a label.
In this case, your details.
You can customize this label with different fonts, background colors, you name it.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So if I wanted a big, bold, attention-grabbing label...
I can just change the font right there.
Exactly.
Now to position our label frame within the window.
We use the grid method.
This is where you decide which row and column your label frame will occupy.
Think of it like arranging furniture.
You want things to look nice and be in a logical order.
And just like furniture.
We can add some padding around our label frame for a bit of breathing room, right?
Exactly. Now we have our label frame positioned.
But it's still empty.
To add widgets, like buttons or text boxes,
we need to specify that the label frame is their parent when we create them.
This tells Tkinter that these widgets belong inside the label frame.
Right. Got to keep that family tree organized.
And then we use grid, again, to position these widgets within the label frame, right?
You got it.
And that's basically it for the basics.
This code creates a simple form with first name and last name fields.
All neatly organized within our labeled frame.
That's really all it takes.
It's surprisingly intuitive.
Okay, this is great for getting started.
But I'm ready to level up.
I know there are some seriously cool customization options for label frames.
What other tricks do you have up your sleeve?
Oh, we're just getting started.
Get ready to have your mind blown.
Because label frame customization options are where things get really interesting.
I'm ready.
Hit me with your best shot.
All right, let's talk about visual appeal.
Because who wants a bland, boring GUI, right?
Right.
It's all about finding that perfect balance between form and function.
Exactly.
And that's where those configuration options come in.
Let's say you want to give your label frame a more polished, three-dimensional look.
Imagine adding a subtle groove or a raised edge.
Making it look like it's actually part of the window.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
That sounds so much more visually appealing than a flat, boring frame.
It makes a world of difference.
And it's incredibly easy to do with the relief option.
You could choose from several styles.
Mm-hmm.
Groove for a sunken look, ridge for a raised look.
Even sunken or raised for more pronounced effects.
It's all about adding those subtle details that make your application look incredibly professional.
Okay, I'm sold.
Relief is definitely going on my list of Tkinter must-tries.
But what about options that affect how users actually interact with the label frame?
We've talked about making things look good.
But what about making them work well?
Excellent question.
And you've hit on a crucial point. User experience is just as important as visual appeal.
Have you ever been frustrated by a GUI where you couldn't tab through the elements in a logical order?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like the tab key forgets certain elements even exist.
That's often because of how focus is managed within widgets.
But the Take Focuses option lets you control this behavior within your label frame.
Okay, I'm listening.
How does it work?
It's pretty straightforward.
By setting Take Focus to true For your label frame, you allow the user to tab to the label frame itself.
However, if you set it to false, the tab order will skip the label frame and go directly to the widgets inside it.
So it's like giving the tab key a roadmap for navigating your GUI.
That's so smart.
And it makes a huge difference in how intuitive your GUI feels to use.
And those are just two of the many configuration options available.
There's Label Anchor for fine-tuning the label position, Passkey for controlling spacing.
Tons of ways to fine-tune your design.
We won't bore you with every single option right now, but trust me.
Exploring these settings is like unlocking a whole new level of Tkinter mastery.
You've definitely piqued my curiosity. I'm adding Tkinter configuration deep dive to my to-do list as we speak.
Speaking of deep dives, let's talk about dynamic sizing.
You touched on this earlier, and it sounds like a game changer for creating GUIs that look great on any screen.
It absolutely is.
Nothing is more frustrating than a GUI that looks perfect on one screen size, but then you resize the window and everything is cramped.
Overlapping a complete mess.
We've all been there.
Ugh, GUI nightmares.
So how do we avoid that?
Tkinter to the rescue.
Specifically, the expand option within the Pack Layout Manager.
Okay, Pack expand.
It's all starting to sound a bit like advanced geometry.
Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds.
Remember how we used grid to position our label frame before?
Pack is another layout manager, and it's particularly handy when you want elements to resize dynamically.
When you set the expand option to true within Pack, you're basically telling your label frame,
hey, if there's extra space in the window, feel free to use it.
So no more squished or overflowing GUIs when the window size changes.
Everything just adapts beautifully.
Precisely.
And what's really cool is that this dynamic resizing also affects any widgets you've placed inside the label frame.
They'll scale along with it, maintaining their relative positions.
Now that's what I call a user-friendly design.
And it's this attention to detail to both the visual layout and the user's experience.
That really sets a well-designed Tkinter application apart.
Okay, you've officially sold me on the power of dynamic resizing.
Now before we move on, there's one more thing I'm curious about. Nested label frames.
I've dabbled with the concept, but I'd love to get your take on when and why they're useful.
Great question.
Nesting label frames is like adding another layer of organization to your GUI.
Imagine you're building a complex settings panel for your application.
You might have different sections for account settings, display settings, privacy settings, and so on.
Each of these sections could be its own label frame.
Neatly nested within the main settings label frame.
Ah, so it's like using those expandable folders within folders.
For those of us who like to be extra organized.
Exactly.
It's about visually breaking down a complex interface into smaller, more manageable chunks.
And on the coding side, it helps you keep your code organized too.
Makes sense.
A well-organized GUI usually means well-organized code, right?
Exactly.
We actually have an example of a nested label frame that demonstrates this, but I think we can save that for another deep dive.
To keep things from getting too overwhelming.
The key takeaway is that nesting label frames can be a powerful tool for creating highly structured and user-friendly GUIs.
Okay, I'm adding experiment with nested label frames to my ever-growing Tkinter to-do list.
I'm starting to see that there's a lot more to label frames than meets the eye.
But it's not just about creating pretty layouts, is it?
You're absolutely right.
It goes much deeper than that. It really is about the bigger picture. Think of label frames as building blocks for solid application structure.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about making things look pretty. It's about creating a foundation for a GUI that's both visually appealing A&D, easy to use and understand.
Exactly. And not just for the user, but for you as the developer too.
Yeah.
When you use label frame thoughtfully, your code becomes more organized, easier to maintain, and less prone to errors. It's like building a house with a solid blueprint. Everything has its place, and it's clear how all the pieces fit together.
And just like a well-designed house, a well-designed GUI can spark joy. I never thought I'd get excited about things like label frames, but you've officially made me a believer.
Laughs. That's what we like to hear. The possibilities with Tkinter are vast, and once you start seeing the potential of label frames, a whole new world of GUI design opens up.
So to wrap things up for our listeners today, we've explored what label frames are, how they can transform your Tkinter GUIs in terms of both aesthetics and usability, and even touched on some more advanced concepts like dynamic resizing and nesting.
Remember, the best way to truly master Tkinter is to jump in and get your hands dirty. Take the code examples we've talked about, experiment with them, break things, figure out how it all works.
And don't feel like you need to memorize everything at once. Explore the Tkinter documentation. Look for examples online, and most importantly, have fun with it. Discovering those aha moments as you build something amazing, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Now go forth and create some truly awesome GUIs.
Until next time, happy coding.